that we've never had to worry about. So the other thing you can do, of course, is go to our website, and that's www.atheistcalgary.com. And if you do that, there's a donate button at the bottom of every page, or you can become a member and you can join it at atheistcalgary.com, and it says become a member, join. You just hit the button and it will take you. So those are ways you can help us maintain our costs. And I was really pleased when we showed this last week or a couple weeks ago with our last webinar. We got quite a few more memberships. I was really, really pleased. So thank you for doing that if you're one of those people. And today's webinar I'm really, really excited about is called Disentangling Disinformation. And it is with Cami Ryan. And I'd like to just give a little bit of an overview. She can tell you about herself more, but I first met Cami Ryan a few years ago, and it was the very first thing that I attended with Helen, as far as I remember, with the old CFI. So that's how I met Helen. And so this is kind of coming full circle. I'm really excited that Cami is back. I enjoyed her talk many years ago, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what she has to say tonight. And let's get back to stop sharing and get back to Cami. Now, just for everybody, the best way to view this is to hit the top corner of your the top right corner where it says view, and put it into speaker mode. Everybody else is going to be muted, including me, so it shouldn't jump around. So Cami, if you can, hopefully you can share your screen, and if you have it in speaker view, it will make it better for your viewing experience. Cami, welcome, and don't forget to unmute.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm just going to give this a try and make sure everything. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. There. Okay. And
am
I don't even know if I'm in speaker mode or speaker view, because
no, that's at our end. We do that. So
okay.
It looks great. And when you share the screen, it's usually not an issue, but at the end, if we're going to have Q&A. Oh, and that's the other thing I forgot to say. Everybody, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we will do like we did last time, which is I will read the questions and I will moderate once Cami has finished her presentation. And that's the best way, I think, when we have a large group like this, to manage everything. So if you have a comment or if you have a question, please put them in the chat. Do not unmute yourself. So keep yourself muted, otherwise it becomes too distracting for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrienne. Thank you. Disinformation and misinformation, they're really nothing new. You only need to think about Orson Welles and the War of the Worlds from 1938 and how that resulted in a widespread panic in the US, or even consider various formats of reality or performance-based programming that has evolved throughout television history. So it's not new. But how disinformation is created, driven, incentivized, and shared today has really changed. So my presentation tonight really provides an overview of what disinformation is and how it really functions in our brave new world of social media networks. So thank you to Helen, Lois, Adrienne, all of you for inviting me into your virtual living rooms so that I can spend the evening with you all. So just a bit of background, introduce myself. I'm Canadian. I was born and raised in Saskatchewan, and I spent a good chunk of my childhood living with my grandmother just outside the Mistawassus Reserve. So I sometimes say I was raised a pagan because I would sit on my grandmother's knee and hear stories from Norwegian folklore, or we gathered with the Cree community and I would hear stories about Cree legends or myths. I was never baptized. We never went to church. But the interesting thing for me was I kind of felt left out. I felt like I was that oddball that just didn't go to church as a kid. I didn't go to church camps. So while my peers were experimenting with drugs in high school, I was experimenting with religion. And so we all have to have our vices, right? So as an adult, I eventually settled on Catholicism in my 20s. And I think that my decision there was because I felt the need to raise my kids with some form of religion. And this could be a whole other conversation with all of you at another date. We won't get into it, but they're adults now and they've kind of gone off in their own directions. And I would probably say in the same direction I have. So right now, I probably identify closest as an agnotheist. It's the only word that I can come up with that kind of fits for me, or a secular humorist or whatever. Anyway, my background and my work, I've been involved in agriculture for almost 3 decades. And for most of that time as a public sector researcher, I have a PhD in interdisciplinary studies from the University of Saskatchewan. It's a mix of business psychology, sociology, and agricultural economics. My academic research throughout studies and my postdoc and my research positions after, most of it was funded through Genome Canada, who's now doing a lot of work on COVID-19 and the coronavirus, by the way. But my research interests are pretty expansive because right out of the gate, my research in grad study involved the exploration of networks of scientists and how their personal and professional relationships impact their productivity. I also dove into the role of creatives and bohemians in primary industries like oil and gas and ag, and the role that they have in cultivating urban-based innovation culture. I was in particular, I worked with the University of Calgary around that. Other work evolved into exploring global networks of plant breeders and germplasm, the role of intellectual property. I looked at ag policy and emerging technologies, and of course, public perceptions of emerging technologies. In 2015, my husband and I left our grown children in Canada, and we moved to the red state of Missouri with my job with Monsanto. We settled on a small farm just outside St. Louis, and we have dogs and horses. And the main reason I work is to support my artistic habits because I'm involved in community theater and the arts. I always have been. Right now, my job is I am social and behavioral sciences lead with Bayer Crop Science. So Bayer bought out Monsanto a couple of years ago. And in my work, I work with a really diverse group of scientists, plant geneticists, animal scientists, medical doctors, toxicologists, pediatricians, and they're all in our regulatory and scientific affairs division. And the scope and breadth of the work is really extensive, and I love it. It's exciting. There's never a dull day, as you can imagine. But my job exists primarily for this reason. Just because we have scientific consensus about a product or a technology, it doesn't mean we have social consensus. So as you can imagine, my job gets pretty intense, but I love it a lot. So today we're going to talk about mis and disinformation, and there's a difference. I want to disentangle that disinformation landscape a little bit for you from, it's going to be a very academic, scholarly approach, but I think you'll enjoy it. It'll give us a lot to discuss later. I want to talk about why we should care about this and why this really matters. And then I want to just give a little bit of an overview of where disinformation research is at today. We're really at the bottom of the S-curve with a lot of this, and clearly there's a lot of research opportunity there, and there's a lot of need to understand this disinformation, how it works in our society. So as someone already pointed out, it would have been Carl's 86th birthday today. And I often wonder, especially when this whole COVID thing came out, I often wonder, what would he think if he were here? What would he have said? And he maybe would have said something along the lines that science is our candle in the dark right now. Problem is, science doesn't always drive the information that's out there. It doesn't drive public policy and so forth. We're living during a pandemic, and this is a public health issue, of course, that has evolved into a social and economic problem. But we also have this other problem that's compounding all of this. It's disinformation. And disinformation is its own kind of virus. It's an infodemic, I think it's been referred to on occasion. And it too, of course, comes with social, public, and economic costs. So what would Carl have said? Who knows? But whatever he would have said, if he were still here, I'd certainly have listened, because we've never lived in a time where we've needed more leadership than we do now. So let's dive right in. Is it misinformation or is it disinformation? There's a difference. In the literature, there's a difference. Misinformation is referred to as inaccurate or incomplete information. And we have examples of this on our Facebook page or other platforms. Misinformation misleads through primarily three things: an honest mistake, negligence, or unconscious bias. And we're all guilty of sharing misinformation. I mean, we can't know everything, so I mean, we just do. It just happens. Disinformation, on the other hand, is qualitatively different. In the literature, it's referred to as a product of a carefully planned or technically sophisticated deceit process. And it comes with intended or expected outcomes. Anything from just attracting likes or shares to goals for an outright ban or vilification of good products or science. Disinformation today is a product and it has a market. So part of understanding misinformation and disinformation is also in understanding how they interact with one another. There are interdependencies. For example, a piece of purposeful disinformation can be shared as misinformation by someone through lack of knowledge or negligence. Further amplification of disinformation in this way may not be purposely deceptive, but it still is considered a perpetuation of disinformation or an unintentional act of misinforming. By the same token, misinformation can then be weaponized into disinformation by actors with ulterior motives. So the thing is that disinformation has spillover effects. Beyond just influencing public opinion, it affects decision-making and it has public policy consequences. And collectively, this all comes with socioeconomic costs. So this concept of the attention economy, I don't know if any of you have heard of this before, but it's been around a while. But when Herbert Simon coined the term in the early 70s, he probably hadn't even imagined the world that we live in now. The ubiquity of social media has really created both opportunities and challenges for science, for business, and for societies more broadly. For product brands or ideas or campaigns to really to gain traction on social media platforms, they need to capture attention. And this is often accomplished by creating and disseminating really compelling information, even disinformation on all of these platforms. So as content has grown increasingly more abundant and more immediately available in our lives, attention becomes the limiting factor. So that, in combination with our weird human behavioral habits as human beings, means that disinformation has a market and it has a lot of power and influence in our world. Attention capital is used to capture the fact that the capacity to attract and hold and distribute attention has these economic effects, and it constitutes a form of capital alongside economic, social, and cultural capital. So basically, like money, attention capital is self-reproducing and it earns its own kind of interest. So let's look at this hotbed of attention capital and the social media. So according to a Pew study last year, 3 out of 10 adults say that they spend almost constantly online in one way or another. More than 80% claim to use at least one type of social media every day. And by 2023, 3.4 billion users are expected to be on social media. So social media is very much a part of our world and our society. It has very much revolutionized how we connect and socialize as human beings, and it has essentially become the virtual living rooms of our lives. So this ubiquity of social media, again, like I said before, has created both opportunities and challenges. But the disinformation vendors, those that seek to disinform, are rent seekers. They want to gain value from this. They find ways to monetize, so they extract value from creating and sharing disinformation. And there are low barriers to entry for someone who wants to enter into this attention market. And adding to all of this, there's been shifts in structures in journalism and the media. So the media is not only the vehicle for promoting accurate or inaccurate scientific findings, but it also fuels debate or creates controversy regarding important scientific matters. Media may not tell people what to think, but the media can certainly shape how people think about things. So humans, I love them. They're my favorite animal. But we humans have some weird, quirky habits. We are diverse story seekers, we are animals, and we are prone to fall into the traps of any one of a number of biases. So, for example, we seek out information that confirms our biases. So if by chance we're confronted with information that completely runs counter to what we believe to be true, we're more likely to reject that information and go back to what our previous beliefs are. It's a comfortable place. We resist breaking ranks with our social networks and the opinions and beliefs of our social networks because there is safety in numbers. And we talked about a little bit earlier on, just about this whole notion of survival. And survival today looks a little bit different, although now with the pandemic, it's a little different again. But today it's social survival, and we are compelled to follow the herd. But the herd operates a bit differently these days. We're corralled virtually within our echo chambers of our social media platforms. So then we got on top of this, we've got information overload. And it comes with that decision fatigue, because there is absolutely no time for critical thinking. Not that as human beings, we're actually incentivized to do any critical thinking anyway. It doesn't come natural for us. So it becomes just easier to take those cognitive leaps when we are inundated with so much information. Another interesting human habit lies in our normative conceptions of information. We tend to view all information as consistently accurate, true or complete and current, without considering the validity or the impacts of any claims that are made. It's on Facebook, so it must be true, right? I think we've all faced that before. So, oops, I'm moving ahead of myself here. Disentangling the disinformation landscape. I want to share some research on the topic of disinformation. And it covers a lot of ground because I'm going to cover a lot of studies that I think you'll find interesting and relevant. I think it'll cultivate a lot of discussion tonight. But I want to start with some work that colleagues and I have done. So I'm going to give you a bit of backstory. My colleague Ryan Butner and I, we worked in the company together back when it was Monsanto years ago, and we kept talking about this. Everything that I just shared with you, we were fascinated by it. We didn't understand why people were so afraid of GMOs when all the evidence says that they're safe. But it doesn't matter. It's not just GMOs. There's a lot of things that public opinion there can be controversy around. So we're really curious about that. We went ahead and we made a proposal internally about doing some research on disinformation. And the company that we work for is very science driven, but it's very about plant and crop science driven. So what we were proposing was something a little bit different. But fortunately, we got a lot of support from the company, and we eventually got this published earlier this year. And it was published in European Management Journal in February this year. It was a special issue called The Dark Side of Social Media. And if you can, these are all open access. So if you can, I would, go take a look at that special issue, because there are a lot of really good articles in that one. Again, we're seeing the beginnings of some of this disinformation research and really challenging the notion of social media and how it impacts our lives on a daily basis. So I'm going to provide you with a bit of an overview of this research, our data and our methodology. We worked with a vendor on this, BuzzSumo. It's a platform that aggregates social media exchange engagement data for various content on the internet. Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, Pinterest, a bunch of them. So we established our search terms and a timeline. So we had a 10-year timeline between 2009 and 2019. And we were able to extract almost 100,000 unique articles from just over 17,000 domains. Now, we were less interested in the aggregated numbers than we were in how often and when they were shared. We also wanted to see how spikes in engagement and sharing of these articles were impacted or affected by key events. And in particular, we were looking at demonstrations and key legislative initiatives. Now, what we were doing is we picked for this study, we had to wrap our arms around it. We had to put boundaries around it, because that's what you do with research. You have a research question and you set the boundaries around what you're going to explore. So it's timelines, but we decided to focus on the GMO narrative. And the reason why we did that was we kind of felt that it had a narrative arc. And as you can see from the data outlay here, it does have a narrative arc. You've got kind of all the span, over the span of time, you see that most of the publishing and social media sharing of articles pertaining to GMOs occurred between 2013 and 2016. Now, the narrative diminishes after early 2016, coincidentally, and we didn't do the research on this, around Super Tuesday in the US. So clearly, we're talking about attention. So attention was directed elsewhere. And it's kind of gone down since then. But there are other factors that may have played into this too. We were also, there's been a lot of experts that have been stepping up and talking about this. So I think that there's a lot more mainstream information out there on GMOs. So there could have been less interest. But I believe that a lot of it was directed to other things, including the US election and Trump. He seems to attract a lot of attention. So on the notion of events and triggers, we wanted to see what the impacts of those things were. So preliminary review of the content suggests that there were four principal drivers of the GMO conversation. There was traditional activism. There was something called science by press conference. Like sometimes scientists decide they're going to turn it into an event, which is kind of unusual. Most scientists don't turn their science into an event unless it's major. Like I expect that if our scientists, when they come up with a vaccine for COVID, they're probably going to have a press conference about that. But generally, scientists tend not to have press conferences. But in some cases, they will. And then there's this whole notion of what we call social media science, whatever the science is on Facebook, and kind of can get shared and reshared over time. And then, of course, we had the legislative measures that were out there. And there were a few of them that we focused on. I won't go into detail here, but there was California's Prop 37 and the mandatory labeling of genetically engineered food. There was a similar Washington initiative. But there were a lot of organized anti-GMO demonstrations or events all over the world. And then we also had the founding and growth of the non-GMO projects. So all of those products you see in the grocery store with the little butterfly on them. So there's a bunch of these events here. And what we really noticed was when there was a legislative initiative, engagement and sharing went down. And that was usually because most of these legislative initiatives didn't really pass. But if there was a protest or a demonstration, that engagement and sharing of these articles tended to go up. So we did see that there was some patterns that had formed there. It was pretty interesting. So I'm going to cover just a few outcomes of this research. Basically, social media has revolutionized how we connect as human beings and is a really big vehicle for sharing false or deceptive information or disinformation. Disinformation is firmly planted in the attention economy, and this is a competitive economy where human attention is the scarce resource. Disinformation influences public opinion and risk perceptions, and this in turn results in policies developed based on disinformation rather than scientific evidence. And disinformation has and continues to be used to problematize science. and it impedes innovation, and it affects social license to operate across a number of sectors. And this is not just about business. This is about university researchers. This is about farming, food production, food security. Farmers themselves in third world countries or developing countries, they have difficulty accessing a lot of these good technologies. So the distortion of the science inappropriately raises the risk profile of some really good technologies. And this results in delays in getting socially vital products to the market. Like, you only have to think about East Africa and the virus-resistant cassava, or shelved or unrealized innovations that don't even meet the market, or even the loss of really important research because field trials are ripped up or laboratories are destroyed. This is what disinformation does. And it's used by vendors to attract readership into those URLs, those sites, with strategies to monetize it in some way. And the big thing that we learned when we did this research is we gathered all of these URLs and these websites. We knew where everything was being sourced from, these almost 100,000 articles, but many of the top producing URLs or websites that had articles on GMOs are hosted on alternative health or conspiracy theory sites. So if you get a chance to go look at the paper, there's a table in the publication. I invite you to take a look. And I'm pretty sure you're probably going to be familiar with a few of those listed in that table. But speaking of conspiracy sites and the power of conspiracy sites, the attention economy so really deeply gamified, and the gamification process attracts people and really pulls them in. It engages them. So conspiracy sites may represent overall relatively a small percentage of the population of sites, but they are very visible and they are very loud. And one of those interesting sites is Natural News. And I'm not sure if you've heard of it or not, but it's a great example of how a site, organization, or set of sites have really gamified the system. So this network of sites attached to this organization is explored by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue in their report here that they published recently. Natural News actually goes back as far as 1996, and it represents a network of almost 500 websites. Natural News was banned from Facebook in 2015 and again in 2020, but according to the study here, it's still connected today by more than 18,000 links to Natural News' affiliated websites. And this was just a number that they found between January and March of this year. So there's probably more. So again, what we have is we have power with those conspiracy sites. They have a way of not just coming from one source, one website, but they found a way to gamify the system and spread the information across a network. And networks are extremely powerful. There's powerful sites, but as we also know, they're also influential people. Tim Caulfield talks about that a lot. What's her name? Gwyneth Paltrow, very interesting. He calls the other ones out as well. Anyway, influential people. And I put this quote on here because I just think it rings true. With great power comes great responsibility. Wasn't it Peter Parker that said that? Or no, his uncle. Maybe that was it. Anyway, I'd invite you to check out this particular piece of research that was just published this year. Colleagues at the Cornell Alliance for Science, they did a media analysis of 1.1 million news articles and reporting on the pandemic. So it's a short-term study over time, but there's a lot of articles. And they found that key influencers have significantly more power than maybe some grassroots sources. So if there is something pushing from an anti-vax perspective, actually it's single influencers that can actually be most powerful in these spaces. They also said that media professionals are complicit in their choices of what they like to cover during this time of COVID. Fact-checking falls short, of course. And they also claim that scientific experts need more coverage and more prominence in media coverage. So I'm not going to spill the beans here, and I'm not going to do the spoiler thing, but it's not, they have on this website what drove the COVID misinformation pandemic. But if you're not a fan of Trump, you might really enjoy reading this study, because it's not what drove the misinformation around COVID, it's more who. So I'll leave that and move on to the next thing. But you might find it interesting. It's a good study. They did a good job. Carnegie Mellon came out with another thing and this year too, and it was really interesting. So we've all probably heard about bots. 2 million, they explored over 2 million tweets on COVID alone, and nearly half of the Twitter accounts that discussed the reopening of America were allegedly bots, which kind of blew my mind when I was reading this study. So of the top 50 influential retweeters of this misinformation, 82% of those were bots. So the reality is that these do-it-yourself bots are really easy to create, and there's a well-established activity in this area, and most of it is agendaed or politically driven. They have figured this out. So again, another really good study to explore if you're into reading those things. Plandemic. I'm sure you guys heard about Plandemic, the last one that I'll kind of go over, but these are really good studies if you're, especially right now, disinformation, big. So Feeding the Frenzy, of course, are documentaries like Plandemic. And I love me a documentary, but when you open up a documentary and you know it's full of crap, wow, it's just, it kind of blows your mind. Listening to yourself to listen all the way through, because I felt it was my job to do it. So within less than 2 weeks of its release in May, Plandemic had more than 8 million views across social media platforms. It's kind of mind-blowing, actually, if you think about it. And this is what happens, right? We're attracted to this information. And if you don't know anymore, or you're not familiar, or it feels, the story feels right, it can be really attractive and believable. And you just throw a doctor on there, or someone who says they're a doctor, and you know, it's very, very, very believable. So what are the outcomes of all this? Well, here's a great example of what misinformation does and how it works in our society. This is an ecology of vaccine views. This was published earlier this year as well. And this is vaccine views from a pro and an anti perspective. And it's demonstrated in our kind of social media and our network-driven world. This landscape here, this network illustrates 100 million individuals expressing views regarding vaccination, which are emerging from approximately 3 billion users of Facebook from across countries, continents, and languages. So the red nodes, they are a cluster of fans of a page with anti-vaccination content. The blue nodes are clusters that support vaccinations. Those that are green are undecided. And what you notice is that the anti-vaccination clusters manage to become highly entangled with the undecided clusters in the main network, whereas pro-vaccination clusters are just more peripheral. So those with the credible messages are not reaching, nor are they being taken up by public. So there is this distrust of scientific expertise, and it can be really, really dangerous. So why should we care? Well, I think we all kind of care, but this is what I like to say. When someone brings forward an issue where they go, oh my, those GMOs, they're awful, or vaccines, they're terrible. What I find that is that these issues are just symptoms of deeper social problems that we have. Like, we have gaps in the market, and we have diminishing trust in science. The public has a diminishing trust in science. And disinformation has and continues to greatly influence those trends in society. So for example, everybody today can brand. Everyone has a soapbox. You can be a citizen scientist, or you can be a citizen journalist. And those with ulterior motives, what they can do is take advantage of gaps in our information or in our knowledge, and we see conspiracies rise out of that. Disinformation and those that create and share it don't have to be accountable. They don't have to be accountable. And you know, no matter what, if you don't like big agriculture, a company still has to be, they're negligent. If they're negligent, they pay for it. That is what happens. But a lot of these disinformation vendors don't have to be accountable for the disinformation, their product that they put out. So the disinformation is, as a product, can be really mobilized quickly, and it's really easily discoverable. Whereas accurate scientific information is less so. And scientific information is usually less relatable too. It doesn't not always come with a really good story, which we scientists have become better storytellers. But no matter what the issue is, GMOs to vaccines to COVID, rest assured that many of those disinformation vendors or those rent seekers are the same, and they generally use the same playbook. And while some might argue that we have this scientific literacy problem, and I've always had a problem saying that, it's that deficit problem, I don't really like saying that. I think that we have an information and media literacy problem, because I think that the information and media literacy problem completely eclipses all of that. We can never understand all the science, but the better we understand the landscape on which information is created, shared, and disseminated, the better we can maybe put into gear some of our critical thinking skills about the information that's out there. So science communication and advocacy on the part of those of us that love science is very necessary, but it is not enough. And again, back to this whole problem with discoverability, disinformation will always outperform science communication and facts because it achieves economies of scale in ways that science communication and facts just don't. Claims out there can become de facto consensus through public familiarity, like visuals and messages that are shared over and over and over again through social media platforms. I mean, that has an effect on the brain. This brave new world we live and operate in is very powerful, very influential. And this world has fundamentally shifted the information consumption paradigm that we have and what we deal with. And those that extract the value from sharing mis and disinformation, they know that. And they're very aggressive at merging with broader political movements, we've seen this, to recruit and popularize claims. So it makes for a very powerful formula out there. In this brave new world, accurate information, evidence, or science cannot even presume to hold the higher ground in debates anymore. And that kind of makes me sad. So we're going to close this off pretty quickly and then we can start chatting. Disinformation research today, just to give you an idea of what's going on. It's a bit of a Wild West, but I'm hopeful. To me, we're at the bottom of the S curve on much of the research, this research game, and we're just beginning now to dive into massive amounts of publicly available data, and we're really starting to ask interesting questions about all this. Now, I'm just going to take it back to agriculture for a minute. This has been my job for 3 decades, mis and disinformation in ag, and trying to understand that. And we all know in agriculture that mis and disinformation is nothing new. We've dealt with it for decades. But we represent, those of us that work in ag represent maybe 2% of the world population. Like, there's not many of us. So not everybody else in the world is really interested. And so there's only a small percentage of us that really cared about the mis and disinformation in agriculture. But I guess one of the outcomes of the pandemic, and maybe a positive one, if we can find one, a silver lining, has really been an increase in the public awareness of disinformation and how it can impact science and societies, because everybody in the world has been impacted by COVID. So now we're kind of realizing that, oh yeah, disinformation is a problem. And we're starting to see that money is being driven, public sector money in particular, towards looking at disinformation. And of course, and vaccines and treatments for COVID as well, but also into the disinformation piece. But as I say, disinformation research is relatively new. access to the data is variable. There are a lot of tools we can use, but no one really agrees on methodology. So I think more now, this is my opinion, I have to check this, but I think more than needing a democratization of tools, I think we need to democratize the methodologies and make them more readily available so that we can really dig in and do collective work and raise the boats around these research efforts. So that being said, there is a lot of really good work being done. And if you're interested in this topic, like I am, I love it. It's very interesting. Sad, but interesting. There are a lot of really good work being done. And these are some individuals that you may know of. Tim Caulfield, for one, you probably have heard of him. But all great people. They're on social media. And I mean, even if you don't go and read some of their work, their studies, I mean, just following them on social media is always interesting. They always post some really interesting things. So I pay attention to what they're up to all the time. And as you can see, Tim got some money to look at misinformation. So I don't know, that was earlier this year. He's probably, I don't know where he is with that particular study. I should follow up with him. So some resources for you, two things you might find interesting. So Tim Caulfield, of course, does a lot of, debunking misinformation. So he has a series of these really great infographics out. So the top left here, that's his. And then the Debunking Handbook. This is Debunking Handbook by Stephen Lewandowski. He is one of my mentors and friends, and I've known him quite a while. Him and his co-author in the first book, it was him and John Cook. They did the Debunking Handbook 1.0, I call it. This one just came out. It is way more expansive, still really easy to read, really interesting. He focuses on climate change, but when you're debunking misinformation, it works across everything. So another really good resource, and it's easy to read, consumable, and it's probably something that you could even share with other people out there too. And it's available online for free. So final slide, and then we can chat because that's the most exciting part. I just want to leave you with some final thoughts before we dive into the discussion. So disinformation is this new ubiquitous commodity, and it is traded and monetized on the attention economy. And all of this is relatively invisible to most people. I don't think most people see this when they are looking at their Facebook feeds or their Twitter feeds. I don't think that they can recognize the monetization necessarily that's happening on there because they're just busy looking and reading things. And what happens is that this disinformation competes with expert knowledge and with evidence. So the competitive landscape has completely shifted now. And all of this has social and economic impacts. You got public health effects, shelf products and technologies, you have lost innovations. And so it's never been more important for advocates and experts to really step up and engage around important scientific topics and public health issues, around science, anything with food production to food security. Because what I gotta say is I think disinformation has been, sadly, the great equalizer. I think what we all recognize, no matter what sector we work in, whether it's public health or it's in agriculture, disinformation is a problem, and we all have to work to combat it. Thank you. Now, how do I get this to go?
Thank you, Cami. I think I'm unmuted now. Yeah, so at the bottom of your screen where it says share screen, it should have a little red, or it might be the top.
Okay, hang on. Oh, so you know what happened here is this thing went teeny weeny. How do I get it to go big again?
Just hover your mouse over, I think it's the top of your screen. I can do it, actually. I can help you out. Look at that.
Look at that. Good. Oh, it's good to see your faces again. Thank you.
No, that was awesome, Cami. We've got lots of questions. So.
Okay. Fire away.
Yes, and first is a comment from Brent, which I thought was when you first started your talk. He said, "So disinformation is Trump information." So
Well, I think that there's definitely some stuff in there. That one study that I mentioned from Cornell Alliance for Science, you really should read that.
Sounds interesting. And the next one is from Larry, and he said, "How would you classify homeopathy or flat earthers?"
Well, I think that there are that list that we came up with that in our study. There's a lot of there is a flat earther. Although I'm trying to think if we published that, because we didn't publish all the sites. We only published the top 50 or 100. But yeah, those are all included spirit type alternative health sites. Yes. Yeah. Well, you know what I think. Not evidence-based. Not evidence-based.
Exactly. Next one is from, this is a comment from Gerald. He says, "Academic is too similar to epidemic." Laugh out loud. He says, "Don't let friends of science name stuff. A rebrand is in order." Yeah. So I thought that was quite cute.
Well, yeah, and that's really interesting too, because this came up the other day. We were talking about language, like us as a group. We're talking. I said, look, I'm a social scientist here amidst all you scientists, but worse names for your technologies, your products, because people can make stuff up about them. You have to think about what you're naming things, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think that way.
If you think about it, I guess you could still have trouble, and things you never dreamed could happen still could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next one's from Lois, and the question is, Cami, have you seen Social Dilemma? And if so, how does that apply to the disinformation you deal with?
You know what? I have not, Lois. I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot of good things. It's on my list to watch. Do you recommend it? Yes.
I haven't actually seen it, but I've seen the main guy interviewed a couple of times, long interviews, and then I've heard other comments about it, and evidently it is really amazing.
Okay. Yeah, I have to watch it.
I've seen it. It's worth a watch.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
Thanks,
Sorry,
Mike.
which
Social Dilemma.
Social Dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy.
Netflix.
Is it on Netflix? Yes,
Yeah.
It's on Netflix.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, somebody said in the comments it was on Netflix. Yes.
Okay.
All right. So if everybody can mute again, that would be great. And yes, if my question, if I don't get it quite right when I'm talking to Cami, etc., yes, please feel free to unmute yourself and add your 2 cents. I'll do my best to represent your questions, though. But yeah, if we all start talking, we've actually hit over 30 people, so that was pretty cool. So Gerald asks, is the motivation of the natural news people purely cynical, or have they consumed their own Kool-Aid? And then Abel adds, or is it financial? Surely they're getting tons of ad dollars from traffic. And don't they also sell stuff on their sites, Cami?
Yeah, they sell things too. So I'm always, when I get skeptical about alternative health sites, it's usually that they're going to identify this problem for you and then offer you their $50 solution. Like I sometimes if, a family member said, well, have you seen this? And I go, yeah, but have you seen, just look at the site. Like, this is what they're doing, like their products. And then my cousin comes back to me, yeah, Cami, but you sell seeds and you sell glyphosate and all that. And I go, well, no, I don't sell that stuff. And when I tell you something, I don't sell you something to go with it. But yeah, I find that one good way to look critically at sites is to just to read around the periphery of the article. So you have this article. So Dr. McCullough put something out, the health ranger at Natural News will put something out, but inevitably there is something around the perimeter that will show you what actually they want to drive your attention to. And either it's it's a combination of ad dollars, but they're also trying to sell products too.
Yeah, thank you. Lois, Helen apparently got booted out. Can you try and get her back in? Maybe send her a link again via email?
Okay, sure.
Thank you. So Lois also has a question. Maybe I'll leave her question for a second so that she can handle that. I'll go on to Abel's question. If disinformation always outperforms facts, what can we learn from the messaging and information flow?
Yeah. Wow. Well, I don't even know how to answer that because I don't know what that means. Like, Abel, can you expand on that?
Abel, are you still there?
See
if I can find her.
Okay. We can come back to that.
So Abel right now.
That's here. That's us here. Here she is.
Oh,
hi. Yeah, so I was just wondering, I mean, one of your slides had mentioned that disinformation always, like people are more inclined to spread misinformation or disinformation or malinformation. And I was just wondering, what can we learn about that? How can we fine-tune our messaging, like the way science talks about, I mean, I don't know, cures or whatever. How can we just fine-tune all of those things so that we can like stop misinformation as well? Or is it like a dead end? Is there a point trying it? It will always outperform it.
well, and I don't know if this will answer this for you, Abel, but for what we've learned, and we're not great at it yet, but we're getting there, is that we have to just learn to tell our science story better. But the problem is with science is there's a couple of things. One, there are no absolutes in science. And usually when you're talking to the public, lay public, they want to know, is it safe or is it not safe? Like they want 100% assurance on everything. And that's the beauty of science. That's why we keep doing science, is because we keep trying to find out something. We keep learning, you know, it's a way of thinking. So trying to translate a way of thinking into stories that are compelling can be really difficult. So what I hope is shifting, and I'm seeing shifting, especially in post-secondary, is that now if you go through science courses and you want to, that's your career stream, that they're also including, and you have to take communication classes. I think that that's going to be key moving forward. I think we're getting better at telling the stories. Like I even know in my community, even in my company, we're trying to get our science. They're amazing scientists in my company. They do amazing things, and you want them to get out there and talk. But there's a couple of things that go on. The culture of science has always operated in isolation. There is a reason why they call it an ivory tower. I mean, you feel like you cannot observe the world that you live in. If you are in it, you have to remove yourself and be objective. Like this is the scientific culture. And the discomfort is that now scientists are expected to come down from the ivory tower and start talking about their work, why they do it, why they love it, what their days look like, you know, how their days end, you know, all of the things. People want to hear that from them. But scientists, it's a comfortable space for them. And because they probably, especially maybe scientists my age and older, they probably chose that vocation because they like working independently. They want to stay removed. So it's counterintuitive in some ways. But I think now that if we move forward with post-secondary, you know, classes around communication, I also think we need to teach better critical thinking skills in K-12. I mean, and they need access to more science as well. I mean, there's some things that have to change across the board. It's not just one thing, it's a number of things. And trying to get scientists out of thinking that this is going to be solved. It's never going to be solved, because even if we get past GMOs, if we get past glyphosate and vaccines and COVID, those that want to problematize something are going to problematize it because they extract value from it. So it's going to be a constant thing. So we're not only having to become better storytellers and learning how to communicate science, we have to better anticipate some of these things that may be lying ahead, because it's not going to go away.
Yeah, and further to your comment about education, you know, you're talking about post-secondary. I think we can start teaching critical thinking in elementary school. It doesn't, you know, I mean,
at home.
At home. Exactly. So it should be a never-ending process. So we'll go back to Lois's question now. And she says, Cami, according to psychology, why do people seem to in quotes, prefer incorrect information?
Well, I think that has a lot to do with the bad stuff is easier to believe. It's that whole shaking bush thing that I said up front. We're always going to run from the shaking bush because we will believe that it's a saber-toothed tiger, even if it was just the wind.
Better story.
And that's fine. We're safe. We've survived. I mean, let's face it. We probably survived as a species because we're risk averse. So we are attracted to these things. I think that we like scary. This is why Hollywood is so successful, because we are really attracted to good stories. They don't have to be accurate. They don't have to represent accurate stories. We just are attracted to them. I don't know. I mean, you probably know this better than I do, Lois, but I've never met a story that wasn't scary that I couldn't get sucked into easily, you know. And I try to think I'm a critical thinker, but I can get sucked in just as easily.
Yeah, easy when you're talking to somebody and they say, "Oh, did you hear this happened?" And
I know.
you go, "Oh, what?" Right? It's your first reaction. It's not. Oh, it doesn't sound like it could really happen. We don't tend to do that. All right. So Helen asks, where do you see the most disinformation? Well, there's a big question.
So platform or what?
Yeah, she got dropped, and I'm texting her. So yeah, maybe platform. Like, where do you see it?
Well, let's look at platform. Okay, I don't know, and I hate to say anything because I don't know, and I don't know any research on that.
Honest answer.
Sorry?
It's an honest answer.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things I don't know, so let's be clear there. There's some more honesty for you, but I think that probably Facebook is not really great right now. But the other thing that I'm noticing, I'm on Instagram too. And this is interesting because I've started rebranding my Instagram to go from just dogs and horses. Now I'm starting to brand around misinformation. I've decided I want to tell my stories on there about mis and disinformation. So I start following these hashtags like misinformation and disinformation. And I'm finding that while there's some really good scientific content out there, there's also the other side that is full of shit that have hijacked the misinformation and disinformation, and they're vilifying the science. So, you know, you can come up with a tool, something as simple as a hashtag, and then they're going to find a way to take it and use it for themselves.
Yeah, it's like they become very good at co-opting scientific terminology and misusing it, but it sounds legitimate.
And the big thing right now, and especially for the last 4 years, they tie it to political causes, and I mean, again, they're starting to study this phenomenon more and more and more, and I think you'll see a lot more research that comes out that's kind of attaching those two, of how those work together in tandem. But that's another thing that just elevates things.
Okay, Gerald says, to the extent that the conspiracy theories cast people in the know as the quote other, is there a legitimate way to cut the legs off conspiracy theories that will be equally appealing to the same audience? Ooh.
Wow, tough.
Big question.
It is a big question. I don't know the answer to that, and I suspect for as long as I've been in this, I've never been able to cut any conspiracy theory off at the knees, and I don't know who can. But that one resource that I showed you, the debunking handbook, the big mind-blowing thing that I learned from the first one that came out 4 or 5 years ago when they released that one, was that what we tend to do when we debunk something, a conspiracy theory or whatever, we come sailing in and go, that's wrong. This is the right information. And then we leave. We leave the conversation. So that person is sitting there, they had a narrative in their head that they believed was true. You basically upended it, but you didn't leave them with a replacement narrative. And I think that's what Lewandowski and that crew, what they've come up with is a way of how to mitigate the disinformation or debunk it by replacing a narrative with a new narrative. And that becomes a whole way of incorporating storytelling into that process of relationship building. And another thing that we've come to understand is that the relationship is more important than the actual, like when you're approaching something, like if you're talking to someone or whatever, it's the person first, it's the relationship first, you build the trust, and then maybe you can start talking about other things. But I think if what we tended to do, I remember I was sitting in an event, I don't know, this must have been 20 years ago, and they were talking about conversational wins in agriculture. What's your conversational win? And I'm going like, oh, this is making me very uncomfortable. So it's not a point system. That's not how we have to look at it. We have to look at this, at the base of this, it's trust. And you're never, ever going to cut a conspiracy theory off at the knees or displace a strong belief in someone without having trust in a relationship first. I mean, we've got a lot of building blocks there.
Okay, next question is from Helen. How much of disinformation, for example, anti-GMO, is related to a lull in national non-issues? How can we counter, for example, natural news? How can we set up, how can we help to get more scientific experts greater prominence in media? And I think I'll stop there because she's got a couple more here.
Well, so that's the thing is, I think that there needs to, right now we have a bunch of building blocks in all of this that aren't working, including the media right now. They're structured and incentivized totally differently than they were 30, 40 years ago. So at one time, what you did as a journalist is that you were objective investigation is what you did. And now what we've fallen into is this balanced journalism, which essentially is false balance. And what you end up having is you have one perspective here and you have one perspective here, and they're being treated as equals when they're not. So you'll have a conspiracy theorist and a reputable scientist, credible scientist, and they're treated as equals. And that would have never happened at one time. But also journalists, and I feel for them. I think that it's a powerful space that they're in, but it's very competitive, and they have turnarounds. They have to develop clickbait. I mean, the editors. So all of these things are feeding into this frenzy of disinformation. And trying to tackle it, and this is what we've learned, is there is just no cookie cutter approach to it. So everything you have to do has to be done in tandem with one another, but also reducing your expectations, because at the end of the day, we still have a media system that works the way it does, incentivized the way it does. We still have a digital world that operates the way it does. We can't stay on top of things. Conspiracy theories and organizations like Natural News, they can produce, and eventually maybe Facebook shuts them down. But even when Facebook shuts them down, they still have to find a way in there. So you're not going to ever really get away from this. And I think we have to let go of that romantic notion that we're going to solve this problem. We need to manage it is what we need to do.
I thought when your comment about the balance was interesting. I remember John Oliver did a thing where he had 3 climate scientists that were against climate science caused by humans, and 97 people in the room to represent the 97%. And I think the same is with GMO. It's a similar ratio, if I understand correctly. Yeah, but you always, as you say, you have just one-on-one instead of the actual balance.
Yeah.
So her next question is, what is a citizen journalist?
A blogger.
That's a good short answer. And her next one, how can we best advocate? That's a big one.
I think the responsibility of scientists and science advocates, and you don't have to be an advocate for science. You don't have to be a scientist to be an advocate for science. You get out there and talk. You get out there and network. The great thing now is that you have access to all these scientists. They're actually out there. You can talk to them, build up your network. I think build up your inventory of people and information that you can use and you can share in your circles, and give the science communicators feedback. Like, I know the scientists that I know that go out there and communicate, Kevin Foltz, a whole bunch of them, they want to hear from you. What could they do better? Because what we tend to do when we're in our science communication bubbles is sometimes we forget, or we think we're being effective, but maybe we're not. We're in an echo chamber like that too. So we need to be, science communicators want to be disrupted a little bit too, and they want new ideas. So that's the great thing about all of this, is that we all have an opportunity to be part of this process. And I think you just have to find a way that matters to you. And this is the thing, you can be a citizen journalist, you can start a blog, you can talk to people, you can bring them in, you can ask them to do a guest blog on your blog. I mean, there's no end of opportunity there. And I think what's happened is we tend to sit back because we go, oh, well, we'll let the scientists do it because they're the experts. We're very respectful. Well, the other side, they don't care. They just go out and they blog and they do their thing and they do it wrong and they put the bullshit out there, pardon me. But honestly, they do all that. So we need to be more like that. I think as advocates and as scientists, we need to get out there and tell our stories.
I'm going to add, if it's okay, because I am the host, I would like to give a plug to Susan Gerbic and the Guerrilla Skeptics of Wikipedia. On Wikipedia, which I am a member. So another way to advocate is to become a Wikipedia editor. And just as an aside, I just finished I graduated, I guess it was in April this year from the training. And my 2 articles that I have done, over 115,000 or 139,000 views in that time. So there's a good way to advocate for critical thinking and science and skepticism. Sorry.
And to that point, Adrienne, so also a few years ago, we started looking at how Wikipedia was lining up on certain things, anything from glyphosate to GMOs or whatever. And it was so funny because our data scientists would go in there and we didn't get involved in it. We let other people, that's up to the world out there. I mean, but we would watch what was happening. And if you watched a site, you watch it change. And then all of a sudden, a few seconds later, it changed. There was infighting back and forth. And I don't think you see it as much anymore. That whole crowd, well, not as quickly. I don't know. And I could be wrong. I don't know anything as much about this either.
Yeah, it depends.
Maybe it does. Maybe it depends on the page. But I think what's happened is that crowdsourcing exercise has been a really interesting one. Because I think it's like anything else. It starts off like a Wild West, and then eventually there gets to be some etiquette.
Yeah.
And rules. And then eventually it starts working really well. Yes. And I think right now we've got a lot of things going on, including the internet, which is also its own form of the Wild West. we can't manage it. And Facebook, I mean, it's not managing itself very well either. Twitter is kind of crazy. I mean, they're all crazy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the next comment is from Jim Berg, and I think this is a really good comment, which sort of belies the problem sometimes that we face. And he says, the lies are free and the truth is behind a paywall.
Very true. Very true. And you know what? And that's another thing too that has been late for science, but they're starting to do more and more things around to solve this paywall thing. For one thing, we've got gold open access like PLOS One, and a lot of those journals are starting to be open, are open access. That's what they are. And then you have other journals that are becoming open access. And I think that this is important because that's public money usually funding all of that research to some degree. So the public should be able to access it. And that's something that changed for our policy in our company starting about 7 years ago, I think, close to just before I started. What we do, anytime we publish something, we pay the open access fees. So a lot of times some of these, the journals aren't open access, but you could pay for open access. So as a company, we always pay for our publications to be open access because we think it's important, that transparency piece. And I think eventually it's going to shift. But again, the whole open access thing is again, its own Wild West of its own, right? So we have predatory journals now. You know, yes, they're open access, but they are full of crap. So, I mean, with every 3-step forwards we make that we think, wow, isn't this amazing? There's a couple steps you got to go back, right? It's just comes with cost. Every innovation comes with its own cost.
And Abel asks, can you provide one example of GMO dis/misinformation? So one example.
Wow, one example. Oh, only one. Gee, I should have this at the top of my head. GMOs have increased pesticide use. They have not. They've reduced pesticide use.
Excellent.
Pounds on the ground, yep.
And Lois has another question. Good scientists always qualify their statements. Does this cause people to tend not to believe them?
Are you saying that they're long-winded, Lois?
No, but as a scientist, I was taught you never say that, this is a fact or this is true. You always say the evidence supports, and you always qualify what you say so that you're not sounding like, this is true. Yeah. And when the layman hears that, does it make them think that, oh, they're not sure, they don't know if it's true or not?
I think it does. And I said earlier tonight, I said there are no absolutes in science. That to me is part of the beauty of science, right? This is why we keep doing what we're doing. But we also have a public that wants assurance. Yeah. They want assurances. So they want assurances that vaccines are 100% safe. They want assurances. And what we can do is we can give them confidence levels. And if you even say the terms confidence levels, they're like, they don't want to know. So that's what we struggle with sometimes. And I work with a medical doctor on my team, and she's so frustrated because part of the thing too with our company is we've been very so if we're messaging around something, if it's a pesticide or something, she wants to say, no, this is safe. This is safe for you to use. The company pushes back, says you can't say that because that's not, but the problem is we have to learn a way to communicate that safety message because it is safe in a way that the public can understand, but that science has to become a bit more fluid in its communication basis. And we're trying to wrap our heads around it. I think it's really tough. I know working with the scientists I do, I love them to death. They're great, but they have this trouble here because they don't want to communicate because the only language they know is the language you refer to, Lois. That's how they speak. And so speaking the other way makes them really uncomfortable. So that doesn't help either. So if they're going to go out and speak and they're going to be uncomfortable, that's not going to really cultivate public, warm fuzzies either. So that's a problem with it in itself. So we're trying to dig down and figure out, I'm working on a sub-team in our group, in our group that works with scientists to help them communicate. Not every scientist a great communicator. Not everybody wants to. A lot of them just don't want to. But there is that magic moment where you find someone who's just a really good storyteller. They have a good story to tell and they're willing to get out there. But it's like the stars have to align, and it doesn't work all the time.
There was a time when, scientists would look down on fellow scientists for trying to communicate with the public. Yes. You don't do that. You just communicate with each other. It was sort of a snobbery kind of thing.
It's the ivory tower. It's exactly. Part of that culture, right? You're keeping separate from that which you are observing,
Yes.
But yeah, it can't be that way anymore. We have to maintain and excel at the science, but we have to kind of shift the culture in such a way that we are engaging with the public effectively. And that to me is probably one of the biggest scientific experiments we got going on right now.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And Larry asks, his understanding is that David Suzuki is against GMOs. Is this mis/disinformation?
No, he is. He doesn't really like GMOs. Flat out, no, he doesn't. He doesn't support them at all. And which is very interesting to me because there's so much I respect about the guy. I remember growing up watching Sesame Street, and he would go and make bannock out in the bush, and I loved that. And I got really frustrated with him because he claims to love the earth, but I think his perceptions of corporations overshadows the value that some of these technologies can bring to the environment. And that's the thing with GMOs, is that they've been paired with minimum and conservation till practices. That means that there's less erosion of soil. I mean, who doesn't want that? That's what we want, right? So I remember growing up as a kid in Saskatchewan in a farming community, and there was all of this summer fallowing. I mean, we don't do that anymore. There's never that anymore. There is more organic matter being pushed back into the soil now than it ever has. The last 40 years in agriculture has represented leaps and bounds just for minimum and no-till, period. Just that has really revolutionized the industry and reduced the impacts on the environment. And there's so much more. And GMOs is just one tool that really helps. But I also think that when I examine or I look at someone who is an influencer and what they're doing, and they're doing good work, if that doesn't match with their brand, they're probably not going to go with it, right? So maybe supporting or saying that a Monsanto GMO seed is a good thing is probably not good for his brand. So maybe he wouldn't support it. You know, he's a media guy. He's first and foremost, he's a media guy.
Yeah, it's hard to, we can't put ourselves in his shoes for sure, but it is a question because he's supposed to be a scientist. So,
well, yeah, he is. He worked, he used to work.
I shouldn't say supposed to be.
Well, he is a scientist, but he's not a practicing scientist and hasn't been for several decades. So he worked in the same faculty at University of British Columbia, decades ago with one of my mentors and colleagues. And basically he came into the lunchroom one day and said, "Goodbye, guys, because I'm going to go and be this media person." So basically just left. And that's who he is. That is who he is. I mean, yes, he's a scientist, but he hasn't practiced science. And when he was practicing science, he wasn't doing crop or agricultural science.
It wasn't his specialty. Yeah.
It wasn't his specialty. So that's the other thing too, is I think we need a little humility as scientists. We need to understand this is our lane, and maybe we can bump over into this other lane, but we better bring the person that's in that lane with us so that we can, stay true, stay on the right, off the rails with what we're talking about. I think it's really important that we understand the limitations of our knowledge and the limitations of our expertise, because there's nothing wrong with saying you don't know, because you can always follow that up with, "I will find out." And it doesn't take much anymore. You can find a plant geneticist over here. You can find a pediatrician here. I mean, they're not that hard to find. So we've never been luckier that way. We can access people now. So this is something we need to do.
Yeah, exactly. Now this next one is from Brent, and we sort of touched on it a bit before, but he brings a different perspective, I think. Is the problem not a failure of education? We have taught people how to read so they can read social media, but we have not taught them the critical thinking skills. And I think that's a really good way of putting it.
I think it is too. I mean, Brent, that's a really good point, because I think we got these great new platforms and tools and way to see the world and access information, but we have no idea how to use them. It's like, I don't even know what a good metaphor would be here, but it's like, bringing a bunch of equipment, putting it in front of someone and saying, "Here, build a house," but then they don't know how to build the house. Mm-hmm. They might just end up hurting themselves.
Yeah, they know the house, they know what a house is, but
they can't get there, right? Because they don't know how to use it. And I think that that's the problem. But also the problem with social media is it believe we know how to use it. Yeah. When we don't, right? And that's the other thing. I've been doing this for so many years. There isn't a week that goes by that I don't get tricked, or there's something that I go, "Oh man, how can I get sucked into that one?" So I just think that we are human beings, and we're always going to probably go down the wrong trail. Mm-hmm. And I think that the piece is we're always going to be running into something that's going to push us in that direction. It comes down to having conversations in our homes with our kids and our nieces, our nephews, our grandparents, or whatever, and talking to each other about how we see the world and how we experience the world. So basically lifting our heads from our phones and actually talking about what we're doing on our phones might be a better use of our time.
Yeah. Well, the next one is from Pamela, and she has a really interesting question as well. The tobacco industry lasted 10 years or more, proving with their science that cigarettes were not bad for you, but even good for you. Were they using disinformation?
Well, they were bending the truth, I'm thinking. I mean, again, Pamela, I don't really know that story very well, but you know, because it was kind of before my time. But yeah, I think that no one would ever say that there aren't situations where bad things happen. Good people do bad things, or bad people do bad things. I mean, there's always going to be examples of that. And I think if there's no other good thing that came out of that scenario, is that I think corporations are a lot more accountable than they ever have been before. It's very hard to hide things now. Everything is a lot more visible. So maybe that was an awful thing that the tobacco companies did, but maybe it led to a better corporate, more socially responsible corporation. And we still got a ways to go. I mean, there's lots we need to do, of course, but I think that may be one of the silver linings out of that.
And I think that's the type of example that's often used to counter other businesses in modern days, or other, oh, look, they lied back then, so therefore couldn't they be lying today?
It's very common. And I mean, that's probably the biggest thing. I think what we got to remind ourselves, that no matter how we feel about corporations, we have to go back to the science. Because I will tell you, having worked in the public sector for so long as an academic for 20 years, I will tell you that every scientific paper I've written since I started with this company has never been peer reviewed. I mean, these are the best papers I've ever written, because of the expectations of the company to stay attuned to the science and to do the best science we can. And you have the best peer reviewers. I have better peer review internally before it gets submitted to the journal than the journal does. So I know, and there's so much that rests on companies doing good science and making it publicly available for people to read and disclose those things. So there's a lot at stake if they don't do that. And if they don't do it, they'll eventually get caught. Mm-hmm. I mean, it just will happen. But it's kind of awful when you know the quality of the science that the company you work for is doing, but everybody insists on turning it into this evil thing. And it's not. It's just a company full of people doing good science, really, at the end of the day.
And here's I think your situation has had this happen to them. It's Mike says, it only takes one bad study to get out in the media to capture the popular conversation, and it seems no amount of good studies can undo the disinformation. He says MSG is one example. Mm-hmm.
So this is interesting, because this is why now what we've decided we need to do is, okay, so I'll step back here a bit. We as scientists are very much have always thought, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this really good study, and this is how we're going to execute it, and this is what we're going to do. And then we publish it, and then it's like when it gets published, we just sort of go, okay, there we go. Carry on, do the next one, do the next one. But what we've recognized now, that's just the beginning. We have to take that study and we have to find ways to translate it to broader audiences, because that's what the people with the bad studies do. And I mean, sometimes it's not intentional, it's just bad studies, they happen. And but what often happens is those science by press conference, like a lot of times you'll get some science that has an agenda driving it more than it has good science driving it, then those things do capture a bit of the media attention. And the other thing is, it depends on how you can spin it. right? So communications in universities, sometimes they want to attract donors. They want to get some media attention. So they will put out, a press release on a particular piece of science or study, but they kind of make it a little inflammatory. So it gets picked up by the media. And then it turns into this thing, drink 2 glasses of wine and you don't ever need to exercise anymore, which is not really what the study says. But hey, I'm all over it. And so what we're noticing with science now is that science doesn't end at publication. Science goes beyond that, good and bad. So we have to similarly put things out there. Like, for example, there is a really poorly done study in this weird predatory journal. I mean, I can't remember it's in my head right now. It makes all of these accusations about glyphosate, linking it with autism and about 30 other diseases, which you can never do in one study anyway. It's kind of crazy. But it got picked up in the media. Of course it did. Of course it did. And so what you have is you have a citation rate like this, but then you have, if you check the alt metrics, which is a measure of the social media and internet sharing metrics, they're like this. And then you take a good scientific study that's done maybe by one of our, by a group from our team that may be working with Purdue University or something. And then you might have, hey, maybe, pretty decent citations, but then absolutely nothing, not on the radar in the media, because you guys, science isn't sexy. It just isn't. And that's the problem with all of this. What we're trying to do is we're trying to stay true to doing really good science, but also finding ways to communicate it beyond the publication space. And they're starting to do different things like video abstracts and doing Twitter feeds and podcasts and things like that, trying to get those stories out there so people have a better understanding of the science. But yeah, one bad study can do a lot of damage for sure.
I think vaccines, Wakefield is a good example of that.
I mean, that's got to be the epitome of, that's it right there. That's the one. Like it's just awful, the damage that it's done. I mean, look what it's doing with us, for us now, like with COVID, like the residual effects of it. I mean, it's still hanging in there, right?
Yep. Yeah. All right, from Dave, it says, are there any studies to determine if younger people who have grown up in the social media world and discussed it in school are better able to engage social media with a critical eye than their elders?
I don't know, but that's a good study. Like that would be very interesting to me. Digital natives versus digital immigrants, right? So, because I always found that fascinating. I'm a digital immigrant, right? I never had this all my life, but my kids, well, no, not my kids. My nieces and nephews, though, for sure. They've always known it to be there. But I don't know. I just think that I'd be curious to know how do they consume and see it? Because we're looking at short bites. We're looking at like they're reading it, but they're not reading fully thought out things. I mean, it's 280 characters or less, or it's it's maybe spelled incorrectly. We're using the F, and I mean, we're not communicating like we did before. Does this represent a revolution in language? Are we going to look completely different in 100 years because of what's going on? Or is this driving us down and we have to kind of do some sort of corrective procedure? I don't know, but I think that's a really interesting question. Research. Yep. I hope that they're looking at it.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody is somewhere, hopefully.
Maybe.
Good question. And Lois just
Jonathan might be able to speak to that.
Oh, sorry.
Jonathan Haidt might be able to speak to that because he's
Jonathan. Yeah. Well, I don't think he's looked specifically at that, unless I missed it. But I don't think that he's gone down. Not like from young people to older people. I don't think he's kind of gone down that way. I think he thinks more generally about how the brain works. But there's some interesting stuff. I put it in, well, let me look at my little thing. Angela Barth, she was in my list here. She's with the consumer behavior group out of Zurich, Switzerland. Her and that group are doing some really interesting stuff looking at language. They look at things like why are GMOs equated with tomatoes with syringes in them? Number one, there is no GMO tomatoes at all on the market. Number two, that's not how you make a GMO. So what happened there? So they try to dig through and do media analysis to try to figure out, but even reputable stories that are giving good stories about GMOs, they even use those pictures. So you're going like, why? Why are you doing this? Anyway, there are interesting things about how we operate in this visual, information-rich space that makes me wonder why we make decisions that we do. And there's one right there, having a really good, reputable piece. I think it was at Scientific American. It was about 4 years ago, and they still use this crazy tomato with the syringes in it. It's just what we do because it resonates with people, I guess. They're familiar with it, right? The de facto consensus. This is how this looks.
And the next question comes from Mike. Is censorship of disinformation counterproductive?
What, to me, is the most fascinating question right there, because censorship is really interesting to me. So I've watched these conversations go on where there's a lot of criticism, and then they're saying, oh, Facebook has to shut this down or Twitter has to shut this down. But then you get that counter argument that goes, no. Freedom of speech, let it go, and people have to figure it out. I don't know how I feel about that. Honestly, I think sometimes my own biases get in the way. And when I see some really crap stuff out there that is ridiculous, like gargle with salt water so that you can, cure your COVID, I just want to lose my mind. But at the same time, there is this whole other piece. Is this part of this process of evolution, informational evolution? Is this a part of how we're getting from here to there? I don't know. And I'm not fond of censorship. I don't love it. I do think that we have a problem with disinformation, but I think we got to go to the root of it. We've all collectively as a society have to just learn to become better critical thinkers, because then we demand better products. If we demand better products, we won't demand the disinformation.
Well, and I think next question.
If I could just add,
Oh,
if I
sorry,
could just
Mike.
add a quick comment to the end of my question there, because one of the things I do see in the conspiracy world is when something like that pandemic video gets blocked, all the people in the conspiracy thing say, see, they're trying to hide the truth.
I know. Yeah, I know. And I don't know. See, again, I'm torn on all of that, because I honestly sometimes think if you let it go, it just goes away. It'll just go away after a while, right? I don't know. And then the thing is, if you cut it off, they always will find a way to re-up it again. I mean, it doesn't ever go away. It's always there. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I think that definitely what has to happen when something like pandemic comes out, you've got to get the experts out there talking about it and countering it, period. That has to happen for sure. Shutting things down, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how good. And that's another good research question. Can we actually research that to understand how does shutting something down or censoring disinformation, does that really help? And then I don't know how you'd measure it. I don't know how you go about it. You have to think about the methodology, but that also is an interesting research question too.
No, yeah, good question, Mike. So Hai has another interesting question. It's, what's your opinion about information coming from mainstream media? I'm assuming she's meaning like on the news, CNN, etc. I listen to them and other sources on the radio probably, and she's more confused. They all claim information is based on science, and it's very hard to believe who is right. How do you choose?
Wow. Well, in our house, so we live down in Missouri, and we live in a red state. It's very interesting down here because we've got Fox News and we got CNN. And so in our house, we turn both of them on because we figure that if we hear both, we figure we'll get somewhere in the middle. We'll be like about the thing. but that's the other thing that's happened, is that those of us that understand science and scientific integrity and what it means, we understand how hard science is. But because it's hard, it's what makes it so great. And we all understand how it improves our world and how it improves societies. But the media uses science as click, and I think they both do, that both sides do. Because right now, again, we're back to the media. The media is competing with Twitter and whatever else. So they're trying to attract in, and yes, there may be political things that are attached to this, you know, to a certain degree, but I also think just generally the media in general is incentivized differently right now. So they're going to use something to attract readership, and they may use science either way, and correct or not correct. Although, you know, sometimes I've one or two occasions I have listened in on Fox and they got it right on something. Now this was long before COVID, but they got it right on a couple of things. But a lot of times they're better with agriculture. But you know, CNN, you know, they've made mistakes too. It's not just one side or the other always.
So it's tough to turn on it. I mean, you have to.
Sorry, I just want to make one comment on that one. Yeah, so since it's so difficult, I decided I just go with the one that I feel comfortable with.
That's good. Yeah, to me that's my thing too. So when like here's my thing. When I was living in Canada, I listened to CBC for some things, but then I listened to CTV for other things. So because I like the host, or, you know, you have your different reasons for doing things, but yeah, I think you have to find your space. I also get a lot of news from Twitter, because the people that I'm connected with on here, sometimes they know things ahead of time, especially the journalists, like before it actually gets published or out there, they find things out. But especially scientists, if I hear something in the news and I go, wait a minute, is that true? Then I can go find out, you know, ask the questions. And yeah, we're consuming the news so much differently than we ever have. And I think it opens up to really more information that, you know, some of it's probably pretty good. I mean, I like that I have access to information, but yeah, there's some misinformation out there. We have to deal with it. I think that this is a part of our lives now. We have to learn to critically think through what we're consuming out there.
I like Lois's comment regarding that. She says she misses Walter Cronkite.
Yeah, like Dan Rather, Walter Cronkite, all those guys back then, they did objective journalism. And you could see the difference. I feel so lucky because I still remember that. Like, my kids don't remember that quality of journalism. They've never experienced that. And it's different now. And is it going to go back to the way? Probably not. I don't know. You know, who can project that? Carl Sagan should be here. I wonder what he would say about that.
Cami, when you go to ask people for confirmation, who do you go to?
It depends on the topic. So I have, for example, today, it's really interesting. I got this she works in our government affairs group, and she knows everything about American politics. Well, number one, she was raised here, so she knows more. I don't know anything. So as soon as I have a question about anybody, Biden or Trump or what's going on, she gives me the goods. Like, she's just someone that I've learned to trust, because when I've gone outside that, I often get what I find out is biased information. She's just she has to keep an inventory of what's going on and understand it, because she has to for business, period. That's her thing. And I don't even know what her political affiliations are, but she's very good that way. But it depends on other things, like, and it evolves and changes. Like, for example, Andrew Canese, he's in Wyoming, and he is a weed scientist. I love his blog. I love how he shares his science, because anybody can read it and understand it. Then there is Lynn Sosnowski from Cornell University. She's also a weed scientist. She's fascinating. She puts pictures of weeds up. I've learned more about weeds from her. So when I have questions about herbicide resistance or things like that, those are the people I go to. I have people in the company I can talk to, but they're academics and I know them. I have a relationship with them, so that's why I ask. But I've been able to cultivate this network over the years, and I probably still don't have a complete network. But at least I know. And if you go to someone, they're generally really good. They'll say to you, you know what, I don't know, but this person knows. I'll connect you. You know, we're networked. We can find other people that can really tell us what's going on. And we should not fall into this habit of creating this vacuum, right? This echo chamber. We have to also be careful of that. So I find I like to bump out the walls every now and then and find new people to talk to about different things. Take it up a notch.
So we have quite a few comments / questions to go here, and we're running out of time. We've got 8 minutes. So yeah, some great questions happening here. Great discussion. Now I have to find where I was. Oh, here I was. I wanted to read this one because I thought this was very good. It's from Brent. And he says, the key to stopping science denial is not convincing science deniers. It's about inoculating the rest of the public so their misinformation doesn't spread. And that's a quote from John Cook, apparently.
Yes, so, probably, yes, out of that, the handbook.
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
It's true. It's true. That is a very good statement.
So here's the next question. I'm going to, there's a couple of comments, but I think we can carry on to Mike's question. He says, when science is industry funded, people have less trust in the results. Do we need more government funded research?
Well, we need it all. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to do public-private stuff, like those partnerships. And I know that there's a lot of, resistance to industry-driven research, but in my experience, the quality of the research and the rules that have to be followed in the labs, in corporate labs, the standards are far higher than they are in universities. So in so many ways, it's better. But universities and academics have so much knowledge, and they have knowledge that we sometimes don't have. And this is why partnerships matter. But another reason why partnerships matter is that there's less public funding now. This is another problem. Like, I think a lot of public research is kind of starting to go a little bit bankrupt, which is really sad. But part of this, and I can only speak from an agricultural perspective, but agriculture has always been done in public-private partnerships, because what you've always had in universities and in agricultural science departments is if you had extension workers that go directly out and work with farmers and work with industry to ensure that the farmers get what they need to do the job that they have to do. So that's always been a natural part of agriculture. And that's why they have land grant universities down in the States, Mike, is that's what those are for. They're kind of vocationally driven, and that's how they work. So I think as much as we do need to continue to invest in public research, blue sky research, all the good stuff, the innovative stuff, I think something that may be more important right now actually is public-private research and work that's done together, because I think that there is a meeting of the minds. There's not only that the collective activity of experts coming together, but you have the funding from the private sector, you have the academics that may know something that we as a private company may not, and just being able to do better and build better and do better science. So I think that there's opportunities there. Plus we keep each other honest.
One thing that's I believe interesting, based on what you just said, is that yes, the statewide programs are public-private in agriculture, with usually some contribution from the academic sphere. For example, county agents, in my experience, usually have a definite connection with a university, usually the land grant college, and they have real contact with actual farming people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just private, it's sort of public-private academic, because the money doesn't usually come from the university, it comes from the government.
Yeah, and when I was meaning that, I was also including government and academia and all of that.
Okay.
Right? So yeah, I meant that. Sorry, I should have made that clear,
Okay,
Bruce.
hold on, Bruce. Okay,
I
we've
was
got
go- I
lots
was
more
gonna s-
questions, Bruce.
Pardon?
Yeah, we've got lots more questions here, and we're trying to get through them in 3 minutes. So could you just hang on? Maybe put it in the comments, and I could read it out. Thank you. So
Okay, I did it. I did
yeah.
earlier.
Yeah, Jim Berg talks about risk averse having some disinformation attached to it because there's a lot of I think what he's doing is he's talking about how people are afraid of risk, but nothing is zero risk is what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
And that concept of what is a hazard and what is risk.
Yeah, so
So-
there's.
No, did
Go
I
ahead,
get that
Jim.
wrong? Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, well, like the disinformation people make a fuss about the risk of pesticide A and not about pesticide B
Mm-hmm.
or energy source A and ignore the risks of energy source B.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Thank you for
Yeah,
clarifying.
well, and I mean that's that whole notion of bias, right? You want to accept that something like I've gone like there is a reason why synthetic pesticides are really good. Like a lot of them are really good because they've figured out how to distill them out of quote natural pesticides so that they're less toxic and they're better to handle and so forth. There's a reason why those are like that. But, if you talk to someone, most people, if you talk to them about organic or conventional, they're going to say, well, organics never uses pesticides. And here we're back to this whole notion of critical thinking. And they perceive it to be safer and healthier and all this. But the reality is pests, disease, bugs, weeds, whatever, they don't discriminate by how a farmer decides to produce his crop, right? A bug is a bug, and a bug will say, well, I'm going to go eat that. I don't care if it's organic or conventional. So everybody has to control. It's just that in certain cases, organics only has access to these ones, very few synthetic ones and mostly natural ones, but they tend to be more toxic. But most people don't know that. And when you tell them that, they generally don't believe it either, because there's this halo effect. I think people create halo effects around things that they want to believe. So even if you try to counter it and say, well, no, actually, this is much better for the environment, it's hard for them to displace that myth and try on something else for size.
Okay, thank you. And we have one more question. The rest are all comments. We got through them all, Cami. This is pretty good, but this is a big one. So you have 1 minute. You can go over time if you are allowed. If you would indulge us.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Go over time because this is a big one. It's from Helen. It says, what is our human rights responsibility to help promote GMOs for countries that could use the benefits of being fed? And when she says that, I kind of think of the golden rice issue, which is a big one. That's the first one that comes to mind anyway.
Well, I think that if anything stands to bring improvements for societies, I don't care where they are, if they're vaccines for COVID or whatever, we have a responsibility, and it's a moral one as experts in the area to talk and engage around this to ensure that people understand the importance of these things. So, I go out and I talk about GMOs and I talk about all these things because these are the things that I know from my perspective as a social science and what I understand. But I also do it because I believe it's the right thing to do. I've watched a lot of really good technologies get shelved. And it's one thing to shelve them in the first world. It's a whole other thing to have them shelved in countries where, again, back to the virus-resistant cassava or golden rice. Well, virus-resistant cassava for sure, because that too is another example of a staple food. They're watching their crops die. And meanwhile, in this gated space back here, the government is running experiments with virus-resistant GMO cassava, and they don't have access to it because the European Union has decided that GMOs are the evil
Or
thing.
of the
So
devil.
yeah, like they're the devil. So that to me is morally and ethically wrong. And so I feel it's my job in whatever area of expertise I can bring to this situation is to put myself out there and talk about this. So I think, Helen, I don't know if this really answers your question, but yes, I think it's so important. And these things aren't going away. It's about food security. And now it's going to be about lives. I mean, we need a vaccine for COVID. We need other treatments for COVID. I mean, we need to do these things. So we have to press on. And if all the different disinformation pops up, and we're going to be playing whack-a-mole with it probably to a certain degree, but we also have to gather and we have to try to find ways to share the science in ways to broader audiences that build trust. And that means getting out and talking about this stuff and making people aware. I think that's the only way you can do it. There's no magical potion to this. I wish there was, because if there was, that would probably be on our list in our paper that we have, but it's not.
Well, thank you so much, Cami. That was awesome. And we totally used up that 2 hours worth of time. It went by very quickly.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I think we will stay online here and just talk amongst ourselves, have more informal. You are welcome to stay, Cami. You do not have to. If you have to go, that's fine. But I think there's going to be lots of people here who want to stay and chat just amongst ourselves. And also I will, because I almost forgot, put in the donation. There it's in the chat. And thank you for all your questions, everybody. And thank you for following the protocol. I think it's with 30 people. It's the only way to do it. And it worked very well, I think. And Janalee, did you want to, are you heading off, Janalee? Bye-bye. Yeah, she's at the pub.
Yeah, I'll just say bye here. I'll let everyone wave. Oh, wait, I have to get you in the camera. Are you guys in the camera yet? Nope, no. I can't find you. There you are.
There we are.
All right. Thanks so much. That was great.
Thanks, Janalee. I'm probably gonna step away right now because it's getting past my bedtime. But I would welcome, if you want to go through Adrian, and if you have questions for me or anything, please do not hesitate to reach out, and love to chat, love to email, whatever you want. It'd be great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, guys. See ya.
And Josh, if you can stop the